The crossroads inn smelled of wet leather and wood smoke, and Harrison Vance was 3 coins away from sleeping under his wagon again when the door burst open, and 5 men with drawn blades surrounded the orc woman sitting alone by the fire. Harrison's hands stilled on the brass pot he had been polishing, his merchant's instinct weighing profit against danger in the span of a heartbeat. The woman hadn't moved, her green fingers still wrapped around her mug, her dark eyes tracking each hunter as they formed their circle. She wore travel-stained clothing, nothing fine, and the firelight caught the small curve of her tusks as her jaw tightened. "Hralda Greenbrook," the lead hunter announced, a scarred man with a voice like gravel. "By order of Lord Castellan Marwick, you're bound for his justice. Surrender and we take you breathing." The inn had gone silent. Harrison watched the woman, this Hralda, set down her mug with deliberate care. She was perhaps 20 summers old, athletic in the way of someone who walked long distances, her black hair pulled back in a practical braid. When she spoke, her voice carried neither fear nor defiance, just a weary sort of resignation. "I have done nothing to warrant this." "The warrant says different," the scarred hunter replied. "Says you helped steal his lordship's daughter right from under his nose. Says you're worth 50 gold if we bring you back to answer for it." 50 gold. Harrison's mind calculated automatically. That was enough to keep 5 hunters fed and drunk for half a year. It was also enough to make them careless, to make them see only the reward and not the woman. "I am traveling alone," Hralda said, her eyes flicking toward the door, measuring distances Harrison recognized from his own years of calculated retreats. "I do not wish to fight you." "Then don't," the hunter said and gestured to his companions. 2 of them moved forward with rope. Harrison stood up. He did not know why he stood up. The logical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through 32 years of uncertain roads and uncertain customers, screamed that this was idiocy. But his feet carried him forward anyway, and his voice emerged with the easy confidence he used to sell copper pots to suspicious housewives. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," he said, stepping between the hunters and their quarry with his arms spread in a gesture of jovial confusion. "Surely there's been some mistake. This woman's been sitting here quiet as a mouse, bothering no one. Perhaps you've got the wrong orc." The lead hunter's eyes narrowed. "Step aside, Tinker. This isn't your concern." "Ah, but you see it is," Harrison said, his mind racing to construct some plausible lie. "This woman's in my employ, hired just yesterday to help pull my wagon through the mud season. I've got her mark on a contract and everything. If you take her, I'm out the silver I paid in advance, and more importantly, I'm stuck here until I find another hand strong enough to manage the hills." It was a terrible lie. He could see the hunter weighing it, could see the moment the man decided it didn't matter. "Then you're out your silver," the hunter said. "Move or we move you." Harrison did not move. Behind him he heard Hralda's sharp intake of breath, heard her start to speak, probably to tell him to step aside. He spoke first, pitching his voice lower, dropping the merchant's cheer for something harder. "I see 5 men with swords thinking 50 gold is worth whatever comes next. I'm asking you to reconsider. Walk away, find some other bounty, and we all go home intact." "We." The hunter laughed, and his companions joined him. "You planning to stop us, Tinker? You carrying steel under that apron?" "Actually, yes," Harrison said, and drew the long knife from his belt. It was a utility blade, meant for cutting rope and opening crates, but it was sharp and he knew which end to hold. "And I'm not alone." This was an even more terrible lie, because he was absolutely alone, unless he counted the orc woman who had no reason to help him and every reason to run while he bought her time. The lead hunter's face darkened. "Last chance. Step aside." Harrison tightened his grip on the knife and tried to remember the last time he had been in a real fight. A tavern brawl in Milford, maybe 5 years back, and he had been drunk enough to think himself invincible and sober enough the next morning to regret every bruise. This was going to hurt considerably worse. The hunter lunged. Harrison parried clumsily, felt the shock of blade meeting blade run up his arm, and then Hralda was there beside him, a chair in her hands, swinging it with the full force of her shoulders into the nearest hunter's chest. The man went down hard, and the fight dissolved into chaos. Harrison had always been better with words than weapons, but desperation made him quicker than skill. He ducked under a wild slash, drove his shoulder into another hunter's midsection, felt his knife connect with something that yielded with a meaty thunk. Someone hit him in the jaw and stars exploded across his vision, but he kept moving, kept fighting, because stopping meant dying and he had too much living left to do. Hralda fought like someone trained, not just strong but precise, using the chair as both shield and weapon until it splintered, then snatching up a fallen sword and driving back two hunters with a combination of strikes that sang through the air. Harrison caught a glimpse of her face, set in fierce concentration, and thought absurdly that she was magnificent. Then the world tilted, and he realized someone had kicked his legs out from under him. He hit the floor hard enough to drive the air from his lungs, saw the lead hunter standing over him with blade raised, and knew with perfect clarity that his lifetime of calculated risks had just run out of calculations. The sword descended. A green hand caught the hunter's wrist, twisted, and there was a sound like breaking branches. The hunter screamed and dropped his weapon, stumbling back, and Hralda hauled Harrison to his feet with her free hand, her other still holding the stolen sword. "We run," she said urgently, and Harrison, still gasping for breath, nodded. They ran out the door into the rain-dark evening, across the muddy yard where Harrison's wagon stood with his old horse picketed beside it. He fumbled with the rope, got the horse hitched through muscle memory alone, and climbed up onto the driver's seat. Hralda vaulted up beside him, surprisingly graceful despite her obvious strength, and Harrison snapped the reins. The horse, used to his master's gentle urgings, seemed to sense the urgency and broke into a trot that became a canter as shouts erupted behind them. Harrison guided them onto the rutted track that passed for a road, heading west because it was the direction they were already facing, and because east led back toward civilization, which seemed like a poor choice when fleeing from men with swords. They rode for what felt like hours but was probably less, until the horses labored breathing and the darkness forced them to slow. Harrison pulled off the road into a stand of trees, guided by the faint moonlight filtering through the clouds, and finally stopped when he found a small clearing that offered some shelter. His hands were shaking as he set the brake. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the reality of what he had done crashed over him like a cold wave. He had attacked legal bounty hunters. He had helped a wanted fugitive escape. He had probably ruined his life for a woman whose name he barely knew. "You are bleeding," Hralda said quietly, and Harrison looked down to see his shirt sleeve dark with blood. He could not remember being cut, but the wound made itself known now, a sharp burning along his forearm. "I have had worse," he lied, because he had not, actually, ever been stabbed before in his entire relatively peaceful life. Hralda climbed down from the wagon and rummaged in the back, emerging with his medicine kit. He had meant to protest, but found himself too tired to bother. She cleaned the wound with surprising gentleness, her touch careful despite her obvious strength, and bound it with clean cloth from his stores. "Thank you," she said when she finished. "You should not have helped me. You do not even know me." Harrison tested his bandaged arm and winced. I know you were sitting peacefully and 5 armed men decided to drag you off for 50 gold. That seemed like sufficient information. It was legal, Hralda pointed out. They had a warrant. You heard him say it. Legality and justice are not always the same thing, Harrison said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Besides, you said you did nothing wrong. I believed you. You do not know me, she repeated, and there was something in her eyes now, some warning he should probably heed. You do not know if I spoke the truth. Harrison shrugged, which hurt more than he expected. So tell me, did you steal Lord Marwick's daughter? Hralda was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face as if looking for deception. Finally, she sighed and sat down on the wagon step, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion that matched his own. No, she said. I did not steal her, but I did help her run away, which I suppose amounts to the same thing in her father's eyes. Tell me, Harrison said again, gentler this time. So she did. The story emerged in fits and starts, told in Hralda's direct manner that wasted no words. She had been working as a guide, she said, leading travelers through the border hills where she knew the safe paths and the quick routes. 2 months passed. A young woman had approached her in a village market, offering good silver for passage to the coast. No questions asked. The woman had worn common clothing but carried herself with noble bearing, and Hralda had known she was running from something. She had asked if the woman was fleeing violence or abuse, received an honest no, and agreed to guide her. She had a young man with her, Hralda continued, staring at the ground. Andreas, his name was, a merchant's son, well-mannered but not wealthy. They were in love, the kind of desperate young love that thinks the world will end if they cannot be together. Her father had promised her to some lord's second son, a political marriage, and she had chosen to run instead. Sounds romantic, Harrison offered, and Hralda gave him a look that suggested she thought him an idiot. It was foolish, she said flatly. But it was her choice to make, not her father's. I guided them to the coast road, made sure they had supplies enough to reach safety, and we parted ways. I thought that was the end of it. But it was not, Harrison guessed. 3 weeks later, the warrants appeared. My name, my description, accused of kidnapping Lady Helena Marwick from her father's estate, 50 gold for my capture to answer for my crimes. Hralda's voice remained steady, but her hands had curled into fists. I did not kidnap her. She begged me for help, paid me fairly, and made her own choice. But I am an orc and she is human nobility, so of course I must have coerced her somehow. Of course I must have stolen her away. The bitterness in that last sentence could have stripped paint. Harrison understood it, understood the assumptions that must have led to the warrant, and felt anger kindle in his chest to match hers. Where is she now? He asked. Lady Helena, I mean. I do not know, Hralda admitted. The coast road leads to a dozen port cities. She could be anywhere by now, or married to her merchant's son, or dead in a ditch. All I know is that her father wants someone to blame, and I am convenient. Harrison thought about this, turning the problem over in his merchant's mind that liked to find solutions. If she came forward, he said slowly, if she testified that she left willingly, that you only guided her and did not kidnap her, the warrant would be withdrawn, yes. Perhaps, Hralda said. If Lord Marwick believed her, if he cared about the truth more than his pride, if she is even still alive and reachable. She shook her head. Those are many ifs, and in the meantime I am hunted. We are hunted, Harrison corrected and watched her eyes widen slightly. Did you think they did not see my face back there? I am the tinker who harbored a fugitive, who fought legal bounty hunters to help her escape. My wagon is not exactly subtle, and by morning every hunter between here and the coast will know my description. We are in this together now. He had expected anger or perhaps guilt, But what he saw on Hralda's face was something more complicated, a mixture of emotions he could not quite parse. She looked at him for a long moment, this human man who had thrown away his peaceful life for a stranger, and he wondered what she saw. Why? She asked finally, and it was not the belligerent demand he half expected, but something softer, genuinely confused. You did not know any of this when you stepped between us. You could have stayed out of it entirely, continued your travels, lived your life. Why did you help me? Harrison considered several answers, discarded the noble ones as too pretentious and the practical ones as insufficient. Finally, he settled on simple honesty. Because it seemed like the right thing to do in that moment, he said. Because you looked like someone preparing to fight impossible odds alone, and I have been alone for most of my life, and I thought perhaps you should not have to be. Because I am apparently an idiot who does not think before acting. He paused. Take your pick. They are all true. Hralda made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. You are strange, Harrison Vance. You remembered my name, he said, oddly touched. You threw it around enough while making up that ridiculous story about employing me, she pointed out, but there was warmth in her voice now, a thawing of the careful distance she had maintained. For what it is worth, you are a terrible liar. I am an excellent liar, Harrison protested. Just not when I am inventing the lie on the spot while facing 5 armed men. An excellent liar would have talked them into leaving without fighting. Well, yes, but where would be the fun in that? This time Hralda definitely laughed, a surprised sound that transformed her face from wary to warm, and Harrison felt something shift in his chest. He had thought her striking before, in the way one notices a dangerous animal's beauty from a safe distance. Now, with her defenses lowered and genuine amusement crinkling the corners of her eyes, he thought her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with safety or distance. Dangerous thoughts, those. He pushed them aside and focused on practical matters. We need a plan, he said. Running will only work for so long. Eventually they will catch us, or we will run out of road to run on. We need to clear your name, which means finding Lady Helena and getting her testimony. That could take months, Hralda said, if we can find her at all. The coast is vast, and she may have sailed away by now. Then we start where she started, Harrison suggested. With the merchant's son, Andreas. Merchant families keep records, have connections. If we can find his family, we can trace where he went, and from there find Helena. Lord Marwick's estate is 3 days north, Hralda said slowly, following his reasoning. Andreas was from one of the border towns near there, but going back toward the warrant's source seems unwise. It is exactly what they will not expect, Harrison countered. They will assume we run for the frontier, put distance between us and pursuit. Going back, gathering evidence, presenting the truth to Lord Marwick directly, that is something only innocent people would attempt. Hralda studied him with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than he intended to show. You believe this will work? It was not quite a question, but Harrison answered anyway. I believe it has a better chance than running until we collapse. And I believe you deserve the opportunity to clear your name, not spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. We, Hralda corrected softly, echoing his earlier statement. We would be looking over our shoulders. You made this your fight, too. So I did, Harrison agreed, and felt that strange warmth again, the sense that he had stumbled into something important without meaning to. So what do you say? Shall we go find a runaway noble girl and prove your innocence? Hralda extended her hand, and after a moment Harrison understood and clasped it. Her grip was firm and warm, calloused from work in a way that matched his own. Partners, then, she said. At least until this is finished. Partners, Harrison agreed, and tried not to think about what would happen when it was finished, when she was free and he was free and they had no reason to remain together. Time enough to worry about that later. For now, they had a plan, however desperate, and that was more than they'd had an hour ago. They spent the night in the wagon, Harrison giving Hralda his bedroll and making himself as comfortable as possible on a pile of grain sacks. He did not sleep well, his arm throbbing and his mind racing through possibilities and problems, but eventually exhaustion claimed him. He woke to the smell of cooking and found Hralda crouched over a small fire, roasting something that looked like rabbit on a makeshift spit. The morning sun filtered through the trees, dappling her green skin with gold, and Harrison's first thought was that she looked like something from a painting, all contrasts and careful composition. His second thought was that he was developing feelings for a woman he had known less than a day, and that seemed like a truly excellent way to complicate an already complicated situation. "You hunt," he observed, sitting up and immediately regretting it as his various bruises made themselves known. "I do many things," Hralda said. "Hunting, tracking, guiding, surviving. I have been on my own since I was 15 summers old. You learn quickly or you do not survive long." Harrison did the math. "So you are 21, Hralda supplied, and you are older, I think. 30. 32, Harrison admitted, feeling absurdly self-conscious about the age gap. Old enough to know better than to pick fights with bounty hunters, apparently. But not old enough to actually avoid picking them, Hralda said, and there was that warmth again, the hint of teasing that suggested she had decided to trust him, at least provisionally. "Here, eat, we have a long day ahead if we are truly going north." The rabbit was good, better than Harrison could have managed, seasoned with herbs she must have gathered while he slept. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts, and then broke camp with the efficiency of people accustomed to life on the road. The wagon rolled north, following the rutted tracks that passed for roads this far from major settlements. Harrison drove, his arm aching but functional, while Hralda sat beside him and pointed out landmarks. He would have missed a distinctive rock formation that marked a spring, a blasted tree that indicated they were still on the right path. She knew this country in a way he never would, reading signs in the landscape that were invisible to his merchant's eyes. "You are a good guide," he said, after she had directed him around a washed-out section of road that would have mired his wagon axle deep. "Helena was lucky to find you." "She found me because I have a reputation," Hralda said. "In the border villages, people know I can be trusted to keep quiet and get travelers where they need to go, no questions asked. It is a useful reputation for someone of my kind. Orcs are expected to be useful, not curious." The bitterness was back, carefully controlled but present. Harrison weighed his words carefully before responding. "I have met many humans who confuse incuriosity with trustworthiness," he said. "It strikes me that you are both curious and trustworthy, which is a rarer and more valuable combination." Hralda glanced at him, surprise clear on her face. "You speak as though you know me." "I know you could have run last night while I bought you time," Harrison pointed out. "Instead, you stayed and fought beside me. I know you honored your agreement with Helena, got her safely to her destination without betraying her confidence. I know you are still here talking to me when you could easily have vanished in the night with my horse and left me to face the consequences alone." He paused. "That seems like sufficient evidence of character." "Evidence," Hralda repeated thoughtfully. "You think like a merchant." Everything weighed and measured. "I am a merchant," Harrison said. "I think in terms of value and exchange, though I admit my sense of fair exchange may be somewhat skewed, given that I traded my peaceful life for a knife wound and a wanted poster." "Your peaceful life," Hralda said, and something in her tone made him look over. She was studying him with that penetrating gaze again, as if reading the truth beneath his words. "Is that what you had? Peace?" Harrison opened his mouth to say yes and found he could not. The truth was more complicated, had been for years, though he rarely admitted it even to himself. "I had safety," he said instead. "I had a route I traveled, customers who knew me, a life that was predictable and secure, whether it was peaceful." He trailed off, unsure how to finish. "But not fulfilling," Hralda guessed. "Not enough." "How did you—" Harrison started, then stopped. "Am I that transparent? You are a man who stepped between strangers with violence because it seemed right," Hralda said gently. "That is not the action of someone content with safety and predictability. That is someone who has been waiting for a reason to be brave." The observation cut too close to truths Harrison had been avoiding, so he deflected with humor. "Or I am simply an idiot who does not think before acting, as previously established." "Those things are not mutually exclusive," Hralda pointed out, but she smiled as she said it, softening the words. They traveled through the day, stopping only to rest the horse and eat what remained of the rabbit. The land changed gradually as they went north, becoming more settled, farmsteads appearing at irregular intervals. They passed other travelers on the road, a farmer's cart, a pair of merchants heading south with their goods, and each time Harrison felt his heart race, wondering if these would be the ones who recognized them, who would raise the alarm. But no alarm came. They were just another tinker and his helper, common enough to be invisible. Harrison found himself grateful for his profession's anonymity, for the fact that merchants were expected to travel with odd companions and ask no questions. By evening they reached a village large enough to have an inn, and Harrison made a decision that was either clever or suicidal. "We need information," he told Hralda as they approached. Andreas was a merchant's son. Merchants talk, especially in their cups. "If I buy drinks and listen, I might learn where his family is based." "And if someone recognizes you?" Hralda asked. "Then you rescue me dramatically and we run again," Harrison said. "But we need information more than we need caution right now. The bounty hunters from last night will have spread word by now. We have perhaps 2 days before enough hunters are looking for us that we cannot move freely. We need to make those days count." Hralda looked unhappy but nodded. "I will stay with the wagon. An orc woman draws attention." "You will be safer alone." Harrison wanted to argue but recognized the truth in her words. Instead, he squeezed her shoulder briefly, a gesture of reassurance that surprised them both, and headed for the inn. The common room was crowded and noisy, full of locals and travelers mixing in the way of border villages. Harrison bought a cup of ale, settled into a corner where he could watch and listen, and let the conversations wash over him. Merchants were gossips. He had learned that years ago. They traded information as readily as goods, swapping news of roads and weather and local politics. Harrison nursed his ale and waited, patient as he had learned to be, until he heard what he needed. "Shame about young Andreas," a heavyset man was saying to his companion. "Good family, the Thorns. Never thought the boy would do something so foolish. Running off with Lord Marwick's daughter," the companion replied. "I would call that brave, not foolish, though perhaps the line between them is thin. Brave or foolish, it has ruined his family's reputation. His father closed the warehouse in Milford, moved the whole operation to Saltmere on the coast, trying to distance himself from the scandal, I expect." Saltmere. Harrison committed the name to memory, his merchant's mind already calculating routes and distances. 3 days, perhaps 4, if the roads were good. They could make it if they pushed hard. He finished his ale, left a few coins on the table, and slipped out before anyone could engage him in conversation. Hralda was waiting by the wagon, tense and watchful, and relaxed fractionally when she saw him. "Learn anything useful?" she asked. "Andreas's family moved to Saltmere after the scandal," Harrison reported. "That is our heading. If we can find them, we can find Andreas, and from Andreas, we find Helena." "Saltmere is 4 days from here," Hralda said. "Maybe 5, depending on the roads. That is a long time to stay ahead of hunters." "Then we had better get moving," Harrison said, climbing up onto the wagon seat. "No sense wasting darkness when we could be putting distance behind us." They traveled through the night, taking turns sleeping while the other drove, pushing the horse as hard as they dared without risking injury. The moon was high and bright, illuminating the road enough to navigate by, and Harrison found himself oddly content despite the circumstances. There was something liberating about being wanted, about having shed the careful caution that had governed his life for so long. Or perhaps it was the company. Hralda sat beside him during his driving shift, pointing out hazards and keeping watch for pursuit, and her presence was unexpectedly comfortable. She did not fill silence with nervous chatter, did not demand conversation, but when they did talk, it felt natural and easy in a way Harrison had rarely experienced. "Tell me about your life," she said at one point, when the silence had stretched long enough to feel deliberate. "Before all this, what was it like being a traveling tinker?" Harrison considered the question, searching for truth rather than the polished stories he usually told customers. "Lonely," he said finally. "I had regular stops, people who knew me by name and trade, but no one who knew me beyond that. I was always passing through, never staying long enough to put down roots." He paused. "It was safe, but it was also empty. I have been wondering for years if there was more, if I was missing something by always moving on." "And now," Hralda asked, "do you still wonder?" "Now I am too busy running for my life to wonder about much of anything," Harrison said, and heard her quiet laugh. "But when I have time to think, yes, I still wonder, though I suspect the answer has changed." "How so?" Harrison hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But honesty had served him well so far, so he pressed forward. "I think I was looking for a reason to stop moving. A reason to care about something more than the next sale, the next village. I did not expect to find it at the wrong end of a bounty hunter's sword, but life surprises us." "Life does that," Hralda agreed softly. "I have been moving for 6 years, ever since I left my clan's territory. Always working, always traveling, never staying anywhere long enough to be more than the useful orc guide. I thought that was enough, that I did not need more. But now—" She trailed off, and Harrison waited, giving her space to finish the thought. "Now I find myself wondering what it would be like to stay, to have someone know me beyond my usefulness." "I know you beyond your usefulness," Harrison said quietly. "You are brave and clever and surprisingly funny when you let yourself be. You are also stubborn and sometimes too direct, but I find that endearing rather than off-putting. Your usefulness as a guide is far down the list of things I value about you." He had not meant to say all that, had not meant to be quite so honest, but the darkness made confession easier. Hralda was silent for long enough that Harrison worried he had overstepped, but when she finally spoke, her voice was warm. "You see me," she said simply. "Truly see me, not just what I can do. That is a rare gift, Harrison Vance." "So is being seen," Harrison replied, and felt the truth of it down to his bones. They rode through the remainder of the night in a different kind of silence, one charged with possibility and unspoken questions. Harrison felt the shift between them, the way proximity and shared danger and genuine liking were combining into something deeper. He tried not to examine it too closely, tried not to rush ahead into a future that might not exist if they failed to clear Hralda's name. But the feeling remained, warm and persistent, and he caught himself glancing at her profile in the moonlight more often than navigation required. Dawn found them on a stretch of empty road, hills rolling away on either side. They stopped to rest the horse and themselves, and Harrison broke out the last of his travel bread while Hralda fetched water from a nearby stream. They ate sitting side by side on the wagon's tailgate, watching the sun paint the landscape in shades of gold and amber. "It is beautiful," Hralda said, and Harrison realized with a start that he had been looking at her rather than the sunrise. "Yes," he agreed, not bothering to pretend he meant the landscape. "It is." Hralda turned to meet his eyes and something passed between them, a recognition of what was growing. But she did not pull away or deflect, just held his gaze steadily and smiled, small and genuine. "We should rest," she said finally. "A few hours at least. The horse needs it and so do we." "Practical as always," Harrison said, but he was smiling too as he helped her set up a makeshift camp behind the wagon, out of sight of the road. They slept in shifts again, but Harrison found himself unable to properly rest during his turn. He lay there listening to Hralda's steady breathing, thinking about impossible futures and unlikely chances, until exhaustion finally claimed him. He woke to her hand on his shoulder, shaking him gently. "Riders on the road," she said quietly, "coming from the south. Fast." Harrison was up and alert immediately, the tinker's paranoia that had served him well kicking into full gear. He peered around the wagon and saw dust rising in the distance, multiple horses at speed. Hunters, almost certainly. Too many to fight, too fast to outrun. "We hide," he decided. "Get everything valuable off the wagon and into those rocks over there. If they stop to search the wagon, we want them to think we abandoned it and fled on foot." They moved quickly and quietly, transferring Harrison's stock and their supplies into a natural hollow between two large boulders. The wagon they left conspicuously on the road, door hanging open, suggesting hurried abandonment. Then they crouched in their hiding spot and waited. The riders came on fast, 5 men on horseback, and Harrison's heart sank as he recognized the lead hunter from the inn. The man's face was battered and bruised, evidence of their fight, and his expression promised violence when he found them. The hunters stopped at the wagon, examined it with professional thoroughness, and had a brief, heated discussion that Harrison could not quite hear. Finally, one of them pointed west, toward the hills, and the group remounted and thundered off in that direction. Harrison and Hralda waited a full hour before emerging, making sure the hunters were truly gone. When they finally climbed out of their hiding place, both were stiff and sore from the cramped position. "That was closer than I would have liked," Harrison admitted, helping Hralda carry their supplies back to the wagon. "They are organized and determined. We will need to be more careful." "We will need to be faster," Hralda corrected. "They know we are heading north. They will set up checkpoints, spread word to every village. Every hour we delay gives them more time to prepare." She was right, of course. Harrison hitched up the horse, who seemed personally offended by this whole adventure, and they set off again, pushing the pace despite the poor roads. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of travel and tension. They moved by night when possible, took back roads that added time but avoided villages, and traded Harrison's copper pots for food and supplies rather than showing their faces in markets. Twice more they hid from riders who might have been hunters or might have been innocent travelers, not willing to risk finding out which. Harrison found himself relying on Hralda more and more, her knowledge of the land proving invaluable. She guided them through narrow passes that did not appear on any map he owned, found water sources when his own supply ran low, and kept them moving when exhaustion would have made him stop. In the quiet moments between crises, they talked. Harrison learned that Hralda had left her clan not from conflict but from wanderlust, wanting to see more of the world than her people's traditional territory. She had worked a dozen different jobs over the years, learning skills wherever she went, and had only settled into guiding because it paid well and suited her solitary nature. "Though I am finding solitary less appealing lately," she admitted one evening as they made camp in an abandoned shepherd's hut. "Present company may be influencing that opinion." "I am told I have that effect on people," Harrison said lightly. "They spend time with me and suddenly question all their life choices." "That is not what I meant," Hralda said, and the seriousness in her tone made Harrison look up from the fire he was building. "You have been good company, Harrison, better than good. I have traveled with many people over the years, and none of them—" She hesitated, searching for words. "None of them saw me the way you do. None of them made me feel like I could be something more than a useful orc." Harrison set down the kindling and gave her his full attention. "You are so much more than that. Surely you know this." "Knowing and feeling are different things," Hralda said. "I have known for years that I am capable, that I have value. But I have not felt valued, not truly, not until these past few days with you. You treat me as an equal, as a partner. You trust my judgment, listen to my thoughts, share your own fears and hopes. That is—" She paused again. "That is not something I am accustomed to." Harrison felt his heart do something complicated in his chest, a combination of affection and affection for her, anger at a world that had made her feel less than she was. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "Then I am sorry," he said quietly. "Sorry that no one before me recognized what I see as obvious. You are brilliant and brave and worthy of being valued for exactly who you are, not what you can do. If these circumstances have given you nothing else, I hope they have given you that knowledge." Hralda's fingers tightened around his, her dark eyes shining with emotion. "They have given me considerably more than that," she said. "They have given me you." Harrison leaned forward, drawn by something stronger than caution or common sense, and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative, asking a question rather than demanding an answer. Hralda answered by kissing him back, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek, her touch careful despite her strength. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder, and Harrison felt dizzy with more than lack of oxygen. Hralda looked equally affected, her green skin darkened with a blush, her expression open and vulnerable in a way he had not seen before. "That was unexpected," she said, but she was smiling. "Was it?" Harrison asked. "I feel like we have been building toward it for days." "Perhaps," Hralda admitted, "but I did not expect it to feel like that, so right." "Yes," Harrison agreed, because there was no other word for it. Kissing Hralda had felt like coming home, like finding something he had been searching for without knowing he was looking. "So what do we do about it?" "We continue north," Hralda said practically, though her hand was still in his. "We clear my name, resolve this situation, and then—" She paused, suddenly uncertain. "Then we decide what comes next, together." "Together," Harrison echoed and kissed her again, because he could, because she was letting him, because the future suddenly seemed full of possibility instead of merely dangerous. They reached Saltmere on the morning of the 5th day, both exhausted and the horse barely walking. The coastal city sprawled along the harbor, larger than Harrison had expected, and he felt his heart sink at the prospect of searching it for one merchant family. But Hralda, ever practical, pointed out that merchants congregated near the docks and warehouses, and there were only so many of those. They found a place to stable the horse and leave the wagon, Harrison paying extra for discretion, and set out on foot to search. The Thorne family warehouse was not difficult to locate, as it turned out. Merchants liked to advertise, and the building near the south docks bore a sign proclaiming it the property of Thorne and Sons, importers. Harrison felt relief wash over him so intensely he had to stop and lean against a wall for a moment. "We found them," he said unnecessarily, and Hralda squeezed his arm. "We found the family," she corrected. "Now we need to find Andreas." The warehouse was busy with workers loading and unloading goods, and Harrison slipped inside with the confidence of someone who belonged. He found the office at the back, knocked, and entered without waiting for permission. A middle-aged man sat behind a desk piled with papers, his face careworn and his eyes tired. He looked up at the interruption with obvious irritation, but Harrison spoke before he could be dismissed. "Master Thorne, I presume? My name is Harrison Vance, and I need to speak with your son Andreas. It is a matter of some urgency." The man's expression cycled through confusion, suspicion, and finally resignation. "My son is not here," he said wearily. "He has not been here for 2 months, and I do not know where he is." "If you are another of Lord Marwick's men, we are not," Harrison said quickly and gestured for Hralda to enter. She did so reluctantly, aware of how her presence would be perceived, but Master Thorne merely looked at her and sighed. "You are the orc guide," he said flatly. "The one accused of helping my fool son steal Lord Marwick's daughter." "She did not steal anyone," Harrison said before Hralda could respond. "Lady Helena left willingly, hired Hralda to guide her, and made her own choice to elope with Andreas. Hralda is being blamed for something that was not a crime." "Try telling that to Lord Marwick," Master Thorne said bitterly. "My son ruined that man's political plans, embarrassed him before his peers, and now Marwick wants blood. If he cannot have Andreas, he will settle for someone else." "Your orc guide makes a convenient scapegoat, which is why we need to find Andreas and Helena," Harrison pressed. "If they testify to the truth, the warrant will be withdrawn. Hralda's name will be cleared. And my son will be arrested," Master Thorne pointed out. "Forgive me if I am not eager to facilitate that." "Your son has done nothing wrong," Hralda said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was calm, but Harrison heard the steel beneath it. "He fell in love with a woman who returned his feelings. She chose to leave her father's house rather than be forced into a loveless marriage. That is not a crime. The only criminal here is Lord Marwick, who would rather destroy innocent lives than admit his daughter has her own will." Master Thorne studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. "You truly believe that," he said. "You are not here to betray Andreas's location to collect the reward." "There is a reward for Andreas?" Harrison asked, surprised. 20 gold, Master Thorne confirmed. "Lord Marwick wants his daughter back, but more than that, he wants the boy who dared defy him. The orc guide was never the primary target. She was just easier to catch." He paused, rubbing his temples. "Or so he thought, apparently. You two have evaded capture for longer than I would have expected." "We have been fortunate," Harrison said, "and determined. Master Thorne, your son and Lady Helena are the only ones who can resolve this. If we can get their testimony, present it to Lord Marwick properly, we can end this without further harm to anyone." "Lord Marwick will not listen to testimony," Master Thorne said flatly. "He will not admit his daughter left willingly. His pride will not allow it." "Then we make him listen," Harrison said, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "We present the evidence publicly, in a way he cannot ignore or dismiss. We force him to choose between his pride and his reputation." "That is dangerous," Master Thorne said. "Everything about this has been dangerous," Harrison countered, "but it is also the right thing to do. Your son deserves better than living in hiding. Helena deserves to be free of her father's control, and Hralda deserves to have her name cleared. All of that is worth the risk." Master Thorn was silent for a long time, his expression conflicted. Finally, he sighed and pulled out a piece of paper, scribbling an address on it. Andreas is in a fishing village called Whitecrest, 3 hours north along the coast road, he said, handing the paper to Harrison. He and Helena are living quietly under assumed names. I send them money when I can, but they are barely surviving. He looked at Hralda directly. He speaks of you sometimes, of the orc guide who helped them and asked for nothing but fair payment. He feels guilty that you are suffering for his choices. If you can truly end this without bringing harm to him or Helena, he will help you. Thank you, Hralda said, and there was genuine gratitude in her voice. You are a good father, Master Thorn. I am a father who loves his son enough to let him choose his own path, Master Thorn corrected. Even when that path is foolish and dangerous, I suspect you two understand something about that. Harrison thought about his own foolish and dangerous choices of the past week and could not help but smile. We are learning, he said. They left Saltmere that afternoon, following the coast road north. The ocean was beautiful, silver and blue under the afternoon sun, and Harrison caught Hralda staring at it with wonder. Have you never seen the sea before? He asked. Once, years ago, Hralda said. But I had forgotten how vast it is, how it makes the land seem small. We are small, Harrison said, but we persist anyway. There is courage in that. They reached Whitecrest as the sun was setting, painting the fishing village in shades of gold and pink. It was a small place, perhaps 30 cottages and a single inn, everything smelling of salt and fish. Harrison asked at the inn about newcomers, and the innkeeper, well bribed with silver, directed them to a cottage on the village's northern edge. The cottage was small and weathered but well maintained, and Harrison knocked with more confidence than he felt. The door opened to reveal a young man in his early 20s, sandy-haired and handsome, who froze at the sight of them. Andreas Thorn, Harrison asked. We are friends. Your father sent us. May we come in? Andreas glanced over his shoulder, then stepped aside to let them enter. The cottage's interior was sparse but clean, and a young woman sat at the table, fair-haired and lovely despite the worn clothing. She looked up as they entered, and Harrison saw intelligence and determination in her eyes. Helena Marwick, Hralda said, and the woman nodded. I am Hralda Greenbrook. I guided you to the coast road 2 months ago. I remember, Helena said, standing. I have thought of you often since we parted, wondered if you were well, when I heard about the warrant. She trailed off, distress clear on her face. I am so sorry. I never meant for you to suffer for helping me. It is not your fault, Hralda said firmly. Your father chose to blame someone for your choice. That is his failing, not yours. Still, Helena said. If there is anything I can do to make it right, there is, Harrison interrupted. You can testify. Both of you can testify to the truth of what happened. That Helena left willingly, that Andreas did not kidnap her, that Hralda merely served as a paid guide. If we can present that testimony to Lord Marwick, the warrants will be withdrawn. My father will never withdraw the warrants, Helena said bitterly. He would rather see me dead than admit I defied him. Perhaps, Harrison allowed, but he is also a lord with a reputation to maintain. If we can force him to choose between his pride and his public standing, he may surprise you. How? Andreas asked. How do we force him to do anything? Harrison laid out his plan, the one that had been forming since they left Saltmere. It was risky, perhaps even reckless, but it was also the best chance they had. He spoke for nearly an hour, working through details and contingencies, and by the end both Andreas and Helena were nodding. It could work, Andreas said slowly. If we can get enough witnesses, if we can make the testimony public enough that he cannot simply suppress it. Then he will have to choose between acknowledging the truth or being publicly revealed as a tyrant who imprisons the innocent, Harrison finished. Either way, the warrants lose their legitimacy. I will do it, Helena said firmly, taking Andreas's hand. We will do it. We have been hiding for too long. If there is a chance to be free, truly free, we must take it. They spent that night planning in detail, working through every step of what Harrison had started calling the performance. They would need witnesses, respected members of the community who could not be easily dismissed. They would need documentation, written statements that could be circulated if Lord Marwick tried to suppress the testimony. And they would need timing, choosing a moment when Marwick was vulnerable to public opinion. It took 2 weeks to arrange everything, 2 weeks during which Harrison and Hralda stayed in Whitecrest, growing closer with each passing day. They walked the beach in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Harrison learned that Hralda loved the sea, had always dreamed of living near it. Hralda learned that Harrison had a sister he had not seen in 5 years, estranged over a family dispute he now regretted. When this is over, Harrison said one evening as they watched the waves, I think I should visit her, try to make peace. I think that is a good idea, Hralda agreed. Family is important even when it is complicated. What about your family? Harrison asked. Your clan. Do you ever think about going back? Hralda was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, she admitted, but I left for a reason. I wanted more than the life they could offer. I wanted to see the world, make my own choices, be my own person. She paused. Though I am beginning to think I can have those things without being alone, that choosing your own path does not mean walking it in isolation. No, Harrison agreed, taking her hand. It does not. They kissed there on the beach, with the waves providing a rhythmic backdrop, and Harrison thought about futures he had never imagined. A life with Hralda, perhaps here by the sea or traveling together, or something else entirely. The details did not matter as much as the certainty that he wanted her in his life, however that life looked. I am falling in love with you, he said when they finally pulled apart. The words surprised him, but they felt true. I know it has only been a few weeks and we are in the middle of chaos, but I needed you to know. Hralda cupped his face in her hands, her dark eyes searching his. I am falling in love with you too, she said softly. Perhaps I have been since you stepped between me and those hunters, offering yourself up for someone you did not know. You have shown me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued, and I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you. Then we will make sure this works, Harrison said firmly. We will clear your name, free Helena and Andreas, and then we will figure out what comes next. Together. Together, Hralda agreed and kissed him again. The day of the performance arrived with unseasonable sunshine, as if the world itself was conspiring to support their cause. Lord Marwick was hosting a festival in his estate's grounds, an annual event to celebrate the harvest and demonstrate his lordly generosity. It was also, conveniently, a very public event, attended by nobility and commoners alike, with merchants and farmers and travelers all mixing freely. Harrison, Hralda, Andreas, and Helena traveled to the estate together, along with 3 respected merchants from Saltmere who had agreed to serve as witnesses. The plan was simple in concept, but complex in execution. They would present their testimony publicly, at the height of the festival, in front of enough people that suppressing it would be impossible. The estate was grand, all stone walls and manicured gardens, and the festival was in full swing when they arrived. Harrison felt his heart racing as they moved through the crowd, staying separate as planned, not wanting to draw attention before the crucial moment. At noon, when the sun was highest and the crowd was largest, Lord Marwick took his place on a raised platform to address his guests. He was a tall man, silver-haired and proud, with the bearing of someone accustomed to obedience. Harrison watched him speak, some platitude about prosperity and loyalty, and waited for the planned interruption. It came in the form of Andreas stepping forward, climbing onto a wagon at the crowd's edge where everyone could see him. "Lord Marwick," he called out, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "I am Andreas Thorn, son of the merchant Gilbert Thorn. You have placed a bounty on my head for the crime of loving your daughter. I am here to tell the truth of what happened." The crowd erupted in whispers and exclamations. Lord Marwick's face went red, then white, and he gestured sharply to his guards. But before they could move, Helena climbed up beside Andreas, and the crowd's reaction intensified. "Father," she said, and her voice was clear and unwavering, "I left your house of my own free will. Andreas did not kidnap me. He did not coerce me. I chose to leave rather than be forced into a marriage I did not want. That choice was mine, and mine alone." "Helena," Lord Marwick said, and Harrison heard the complicated emotions in that single word: relief, anger, wounded pride. "Come down from there. We will discuss this privately." "No," Helena said firmly. "You have made this public by issuing bounties and spreading lies. The truth will be equally public. Andreas and I are married now, Father. We were wed by a priest in Saltmere, legally and properly. I am no longer your daughter to command. I am a married woman making my own choices." "You were coerced," Lord Marwick insisted, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "The Orc guide, Hralda Greenbrook, served as my paid guide," Helena interrupted. "She asked me if I was fleeing violence or coercion, and when I said no, she agreed to help me reach the coast." "She did nothing wrong, Father. The only criminal here is you, for placing a bounty on an innocent woman out of misplaced pride." Hralda stepped forward then, moving through the crowd to stand visible at the wagon's base. Harrison followed, along with the merchant witnesses, and they formed a united front. "I am Hralda Greenbrook," she said, her voice steady despite the attention. "I am accused of kidnapping Lady Helena Marwick. I did not. I guided her for pay with her full consent. Lord Marwick knows this, but he would rather punish someone than admit his daughter defied him. That is not justice. That is tyranny." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Harrison saw the calculation in Lord Marwick's eyes. He was measuring public opinion, weighing his options, and Harrison pressed their advantage. "We have witnesses," Harrison called out, gesturing to the merchants. "Respected members of the Saltmere community who can attest to Lady Helena and Andreas's marriage, to their willing elopement, to the truth of Hralda's innocence. We have documentation, signed statements that have already been sent to the regional magistrate. This can end now, Lord Marwick, with the warrants withdrawn and all parties free to live in peace. Or it can continue, with your reputation damaged and your actions questioned by all who hear this tale. The choice is yours." Lord Marwick stood frozen, his face a study in conflicting emotions. Harrison held his breath, aware that this could go either way, that pride might still win over sense. Then Helena spoke again, softer this time but no less firm. "Father, I loved you once. I can love you again if you let me, but not like this. Not with lies and bounties and innocent people suffering for my choices. Let it end, please." Something in Lord Marwick's face shifted, and Harrison saw the moment the man's pride cracked. He looked at his daughter, at the crowd, at the witnesses, and finally bowed his head in defeat. "The warrants are withdrawn," he said, his voice barely carrying. Then, louder, addressing the crowd, "The warrants are withdrawn. There has been a misunderstanding. My daughter and her husband have my blessing." The last words clearly pained him, but he said them anyway. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Harrison felt relief so intense it made him dizzy. They had done it. They had actually done it. Hralda turned to him, her eyes bright with tears, and he pulled her into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. She laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed him thoroughly, uncaring who saw. When they finally separated, Andreas and Helena had climbed down from the wagon and were making their way through the congratulatory crowd. Helena's father had disappeared, retreating into his estate with what remained of his pride, but that seemed like a problem for another day. "Thank you," Helena said when she reached them, taking Hralda's hands in hers. "Thank you for everything. For helping me escape, for fighting to clear your name, for being brave enough to stand here and demand justice. I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You owe me nothing," Hralda said. "You made your own choice and stood by it. That took courage." "Not as much courage as you have shown," Andreas said, shaking Harrison's hand firmly. "When my father told me what you did, fighting those hunters for a stranger, I could hardly believe it. You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Harrison admitted. "Though I prefer to think of it as opportunistically heroic." Andreas laughed at that, and the tension that had been building for weeks finally broke. They were free, all of them, free to live their lives without fear of bounty hunters or unjust warrants. The celebration lasted well into the evening, and Harrison found himself pulled into conversation with merchants who had heard of his actions and wanted to know the full story. He told it with increasing embellishment, enjoying the performance aspect, but always making sure to emphasize Hralda's role, her courage and intelligence. As the sun set, painting the estate grounds in shades of orange and purple, Harrison found Hralda standing apart from the crowd, looking out over the countryside with an expression he could not quite read. "Regretting anything?" he asked softly, coming to stand beside her. "No," Hralda said immediately. "Not for a moment. I was just thinking about what comes next. We have spent so long focused on surviving, on clearing my name, that I have not allowed myself to think beyond that moment. And now it is here, and I find myself uncertain." Harrison took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "We have options," he said. "We could stay here near the coast. You said you loved the sea. I could set up a proper shop, stop traveling. Or we could continue to travel together, both of us, seeing the world as partners. Or we could do something else entirely, something we have not thought of yet. The point is, we get to choose, both of us together." Hralda turned to face him fully, and Harrison saw hope and fear and love all mingled in her expression. "You truly want that?" she asked. "A future with me, despite everything. Despite what people will say about a human man and an orc woman, I want you," Harrison said simply. "Everything else is just details. Yes, some people will disapprove. Some will say cruel things or make our lives harder. But I spent 32 years living safely and carefully, and I was never as happy as I have been these past weeks with you. If I have to choose between an easy life alone and a complicated life with you, I choose you. Every time." Hralda's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I choose you too," she whispered. "I choose the complicated, beautiful, impossible future we can build together." Harrison kissed her then, pouring everything he felt into it, love and hope and promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and grinning like fools. "So," Hralda said. "What do we do now?" "Now," Harrison said, "I believe the proper next step is for me to ask you a very important question." He dropped to one knee there in Lord Marwick's estate grounds, in front of anyone who cared to watch, and took Hralda's hand in both of his. "Hralda Greenbrook," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You are the bravest, most remarkable person I have ever met. You have changed my life in ways I cannot fully express. I know we have known each other only a few weeks, and I know the world will not make this easy, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Geralda's tears were flowing freely now, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, absolutely yes." The small crowd that had gathered to watch applauded, and Harrison found himself laughing with pure joy as he spun Geralda in a circle, her feet leaving the ground. They were both laughing when he set her down, both crying a little, both overwhelmed by the sudden shift from survival to celebration. Andreas and Helena pushed through the crowd to offer congratulations, and Helena was beaming. "You should marry here," she said impulsively. "Not today, obviously, but soon. Andreas and I were thinking of hosting a proper wedding for ourselves, something public to celebrate our freedom. You should join us, make it a double celebration. We owe you that much, at least." Harrison looked at Geralda, saw his own surprise mirrored in her face. "That is a generous offer," he said carefully. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely certain," Andreas confirmed. "We have been living in hiding for months, unable to celebrate our marriage properly. Now that we are free, we want to do it right, with family and friends and witnesses. And you two are the reason we have that freedom. Sharing the celebration feels right." Geralda squeezed Harrison's hand. "I would like that," she said softly. "If you would." "I would," Harrison agreed, feeling the rightness of it settle in his chest. "Though I have to warn you, I own exactly one set of decent clothes, and they are currently rolled up in my wagon." "We have a month to plan," Helena said practically. "Plenty of time to acquire appropriate clothing. My mother, if she forgives me, will insist on helping. She loves weddings." The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation and adjustment. Andreas and Helena moved back to Saltmere, to a house Andreas's father purchased for them as a wedding gift and apology. Harrison and Geralda stayed with them, helping with the preparations and slowly building their own plans for the future. Harrison sent word to his sister, extending an olive branch after years of silence and inviting her to the wedding. To his surprise and delight, she responded immediately, not only accepting the invitation but expressing joy at his upcoming marriage and eagerness to meet Geralda. "She is bringing her family," Harrison reported, reading the letter for the third time. "Her husband, their 2 children. She says she is proud of me for choosing love over caution." "I like your sister already," Geralda said, reading over his shoulder, "though I am nervous about meeting her." "She will love you," Harrison assured her. "How could she not?" They spent their days helping with wedding preparations and their evenings walking the beach, talking about their future. Harrison had decided to give up traveling sales, finding the prospect less appealing now that he had someone to come home to. Instead, he planned to open a shop in Saltmere, serving as a local tinker and metalworker. "I could help," Geralda offered one evening. "I am good with my hands and I learn quickly. We could run it together." "Partners in business as well as life," Harrison said, testing the idea and finding it perfect. "I like that, though I suspect you will be better at the actual work than I am. My strength has always been in the selling, not the making." "Then we complement each other," Geralda said simply. "You sell, I make, and together we build something lasting." They found a small shop near the docks, with living quarters above and enough space for a workshop. Andreas's father, grateful for their role in reuniting him with his son, offered favorable terms on the lease and even provided some initial stock. By the time the wedding date arrived, they had the beginnings of a functional business and a home of their own. The wedding was held in Saltmere's largest church, a stone building that had stood for 3 centuries and welcomed all who entered. Helena's mother had indeed forgiven her daughter, swept into the planning with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time, and the result was a celebration that felt both intimate and grand. Harrison stood at the altar in clothing his sister had insisted on buying him, too nervous to fully appreciate the irony of a tinker getting married in silk. Beside him, Andreas looked equally overwhelmed, and they shared a moment of mutual commiseration. Then the music started, and Helena entered first, radiant in a dress of cream and gold, her father at her side looking uncomfortable but determined. Lord Marwick had not withdrawn his daughter's dowry, had even offered a stiff apology to Andreas's family, and was clearly trying to rebuild bridges he had nearly burned. It would take time, but the effort was genuine. Hralda followed, and Harrison's breath caught. She wore a dress of deep green that matched her skin beautifully, simple in cut but perfect in execution, and her dark hair was unbound, falling in waves down her back. She carried wildflowers instead of formal arrangements, and her small tusks gleamed in the candlelight as she smiled. Harrison had never seen anything more beautiful in his life. The ceremony was traditional, words spoken by a priest who seemed utterly unbothered by performing a dual wedding for two such unusual couples. Harrison made his vows with a steady voice, promising love and faithfulness and partnership, and meant every word down to his bones. Hralda's own vows were shorter, more direct, but no less sincere. "I promise to choose you every day," she said, her hands in his. "To be your partner in all things, to share both joys and struggles, to build a life with you that honors both of us. You saw me when others looked past me, valued me when others saw only usefulness. I promise to always see you, always value you, for exactly who you are." The rings they exchanged were simple bands Harrison had made himself, learning metalworking basics from a patient blacksmith. They were not perfect, but they were made with love, and that seemed more important than technical precision. When the priest pronounced them married, both couples, in a joint blessing that felt wonderfully communal, Harrison kissed his wife with joy that bordered on giddiness. Beside them, Andreas and Helena did the same, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was everything a wedding should be: food and dancing and toasts that grew increasingly ridiculous as the wine flowed. Harrison's sister pulled him aside at one point, tears in her eyes, to tell him how happy she was for him, how right Hralda seemed for him. Andreas's father made a speech that managed to be both heartfelt and humorous, welcoming both new daughters-in-law to the family. Even Lord Marwick offered grudging congratulations, though he left early, still working through his own complicated feelings about his daughter's choices. As the evening wore on, Harrison found himself standing with Andreas, both watching their wives dance together in a circle of other women. "We are lucky men," Andreas observed, and Harrison could only agree. "We are," he said, "though I think luck had less to do with it than choice. We chose to fight for them, to stand beside them, to prioritize their happiness and freedom. That matters more than fortune." "Philosophical," Andreas said with a grin, "but true. Here is to choices, then, and to the people brave enough to make them." They toasted with their cups, and Harrison felt a profound sense of contentment settle over him. His life had changed completely in the space of a few weeks, transformed from safe and predictable to uncertain and wonderful. He had found love, purpose, and a future he actually wanted to live. The night deepened, stars appearing overhead, and eventually Harrison and Hralda said their goodbyes, slipping away from the celebration to walk home through quiet streets. They did not speak much, content to simply be together, hands clasped and steps matched. Their shop was dark when they arrived, but Harrison lit a lamp and the space came alive with warm light. It was not much yet, a workshop still being organized, living quarters sparsely furnished, but it was theirs, built on their choices and their labor. Happy? Harrison asked, pulling Hralda close. Happier than I knew I could be, she said, resting her head against his shoulder. I spent so long moving, never staying, never letting myself want permanence. And now I have all of it, a home, a husband, a future. It feels almost too good to be real. It is real, Harrison assured her. We are real, and this is our life now. Not perfect, not without challenges, but ours. They climbed the stairs to their living quarters, to the bedroom that was still mostly empty but contained a bed and clean linens and the promise of shared nights ahead. Harrison drew Hralda close, kissing her softly, savoring the knowledge that this was not temporary, not stolen moments between crises, but the beginning of a life together. I love you, he said against her lips. My wife, my partner, my future. I love you too, Hralda replied. My husband. My choice. My home. They spent their wedding night wrapped in each other, speaking words of love and promise between kisses, building intimacy with the same care they had built trust. Harrison had been with other women before, brief encounters on the road that meant little, but this was different. This was connection, vulnerability, the physical expression of everything they felt for each other. When they finally slept, it was tangled together, hearts beating in unconscious synchronization, both at peace in a way neither had known before. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt remarkably normal despite how unusual their circumstances might appear to others. Harrison and Hralda opened their shop formally, advertising Harrison's skill in repair and Hralda's growing talent for crafting new goods. Customers came slowly at first, some curious about the orc woman running a business with her human husband, but word spread of their fair prices and quality work, and soon they were legitimately busy. Andreas and Helena visited regularly, the four of them forming a friendship that felt like family. They shared meals, traded stories, and supported each other through the small crises that accompanied starting new lives. Harrison's sister came to visit for a week, bringing her family, and Hralda won them over completely by teaching the children to skip stones on the beach and listening to his sister's stories with genuine interest. By the time they left, promises had been made to visit regularly, to stay connected in ways Harrison had not managed in years. Spring turned to summer, and their shop prospered. Harrison found he enjoyed the stability of a single location, of knowing his neighbors and being part of a community. Hralda flourished as well, her natural competence finding expression in craftsmanship, and soon she was taking on complex commissions that challenged and satisfied her. One evening, as they closed the shop and prepared for bed, Hralda mentioned casually that her monthly bleeding had not come. Harrison froze, pot halfway to the shelf. Are you? He could not quite finish the question. I think so, Hralda said, and there was wonder in her voice. It is early yet, too soon to be certain, but I think I might be carrying our child. Harrison set down the pot carefully, aware that his hands were shaking. A child. Their child. He crossed to Hralda and pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by emotions too large and complex for words. How do you feel about that? He asked when he could speak. We have not exactly discussed children. Terrified, Hralda admitted. And excited, and hopeful. I did not think I wanted children, thought I was too restless, too focused on my own freedom. But now, with you in this life we have built, I find myself wanting it. Wanting to create a family with you. I want that too, Harrison said, and felt the truth of it settle into his bones. I want everything with you children, years, a life so full and rich we cannot imagine ending it. You have given me more than I ever thought to ask for, and I want to give you everything in return. They confirmed the pregnancy a few weeks later, and the news was met with celebration from everyone they told. Helena, already showing with her own pregnancy, was delighted to have someone to share the experience with. Andreas's father seemed personally invested in the idea of grandchildren, offering advice Harrison was not certain he wanted and gifts they definitely needed. Harrison's sister sent a package of baby clothes she had saved from her own children, along with a letter expressing joy and offering to visit when the baby arrived. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, Hralda remaining healthy and strong even as her body changed. Harrison found himself constantly amazed by her, by the way she adapted to each new challenge with grace and determination. She worked in the shop until she physically could not anymore, and even then she directed operations from a chair, unwilling to be sidelined. Their daughter arrived on a crisp autumn evening, born with her mother's green skin and her father's dark hair, squalling her displeasure at the world with impressive volume. They named her Juliana, after Harrison's grandmother, and she was perfect. Harrison held his daughter for the first time and felt his entire understanding of love expand. He had thought he knew what love meant, had felt it deeply for Hralda, but this was something different, something primal and protective and overwhelming. This small person was his responsibility, his to protect and guide and cherish, and the weight of it staggered him. "She is beautiful," he whispered, not trusting his voice above a murmur. "She is ours," Hralda corrected, reaching up to touch their daughter's tiny hand. "Our family, our future." Helena and Andreas's son was born 2 weeks later, and the 4 adults joked about arranging a marriage between the children before they could even walk. It was all in jest, but there was truth beneath it, acknowledgement that their children would grow up together, would have each other as friends and allies in a world that might not always be kind to unusual families. The years that followed were full in the way good years are, busy with work and parenthood, rich with relationships, complicated by the small struggles that are inevitable in any life. Harrison and Hralda's shop thrived, becoming a fixture in Saltmere's commercial district. They hired help as needed, training apprentices and passing on skills. Juliana grew into a curious, strong-willed child who asked endless questions and climbed everything she could reach. She had her mother's determination and her father's charm, and Harrison already pitied whatever young person eventually fell for her. When Juliana was 3, Hralda became pregnant again, and their son Marcus arrived with considerably less drama than his sister. He was quieter than Juliana, more contemplative, content to watch the world rather than immediately trying to conquer it. Harrison's sister visited regularly, their relationship fully healed, and her children grew up thinking of Juliana and Marcus as cousins. Lord Marwick remained distant but civil, eventually accepting that his daughter's marriage was permanent and even developing a grudging respect for Andreas. Helena's relationship with her father would never be easy, but it existed, and that was enough. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Harrison and Hralda closed the shop early and walked to the beach where they had first confessed their love. The children were with Andreas and Helena for the evening, giving them rare time alone. "You regret anything?" Hralda asked as they watched the waves, and Harrison had to laugh at the question. "Are you seriously asking me that? Now, after 5 years of marriage and 2 children and a life I could never have imagined wanting, I am asking," Hralda said, but she was smiling. "Because sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is real, that I have this life, this family, that I found you." Harrison pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I regret nothing," he said firmly. "Not stepping in front of those hunters, not running with you, not proposing after knowing you for weeks. Every choice I made led me here to you, to this life. I would make them all again without hesitation. Even the part where you got stabbed," Hralda teased. "Especially that part," Harrison confirmed. It made for an excellent story, and our customers love it." Ralda laughed, the sound carrying over the waves, and Harrison felt contentment so profound it was almost painful. He had spent the first 32 years of his life searching for something without knowing what it was, traveling roads that led nowhere permanent, looking for purpose in transactions and sales. And then he had found her fierce and brave and beautiful Ralda, who had needed defending for just one moment and had somehow ended up being the one to save him. She had given him purpose and partnership, love and family, a future he actually wanted to live. "Thank you," he said quietly, seriously, "for choosing me, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." Ralda turned in his arms, cupping his face in her hands. "Thank you for seeing me," she replied, "for valuing me, for defending me when you had no reason to. You changed everything, Harrison Vance. You gave me a home when I did not even know I wanted one." They kissed there on the beach, 5 years married and still discovering new depths to their love, and Harrison thought about the boy who had stepped between a stranger and violence without thinking. That boy had been brave and foolish and desperate for meaning, and he had found all of it in the green-skinned orc woman who had become his everything. The sun set over the water, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, and Harrison and Ralda walked home hand in hand. Their children would be returned soon, their evening alone ending, but that was fine. Their family was waiting, their life was waiting, and Harrison could not imagine wanting anything more than what they had built together. He had defended a stranger against bounty hunters, and she had become his wanted bride in every sense of the word, wanted by law, wanted by him, wanted by the life they had chosen together. It was a story that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago, but it was their story, their truth, their happily ever after. And Harrison, who had spent years selling goods to strangers, had finally found the one thing he could never sell: a home, a family, and a love that transformed everything it touched.